What's been the most rewarding thing about your research?
The most rewarding thing, two things. So one from like kind of an individual level, and then one from more of a social level is, for me, the coolest moment is when you run something through like SPSS, a statistical software program, and you get like a number, or you're reading through interviews and you finally kind of dig through and discover like a really nice hearty theme in those interviews, and you can have that day before you like tell your lab mates or you tell your supervisor, where you're like, I am the only person in the world that knows this right now. This is so cool. So that's really, really neat, is not even like writing it up, not sending it into a journal to have that manuscript approved. Blah. It's that moment where like, this is first of its kind and only me. I am the purveyor of all the knowledge in this world. Just kidding. It's a tiny little blip of something. So there's that. That's really rewarding. But it doesn't happen too often. Research is slow, particularly in the land of COVID. It takes a long time to get to that little nugget. But something that happens a little bit more often, but not as often as I love, because, you know, researchers love talking about their own research. I love being able to, for example, like we're having right now, have a conversation about my research. Again, we love talking about our research, but more so, is there something about what I've kind of stumbled upon on what I've been reading or what I've been researching myself that can help you? So is there something that I can share with you, some kind of knowledge that I can translate to you that might make whatever journey that you're on go a little bit smoother, or a tool that I can add to your toolkit? So that's really cool too. But again, you know, no one wants to talk about research too much, so I totally get it.
Well, I really enjoy talking about research, so
Yeah.
I'm always here. Was there anything that you found that you weren't expecting? Was there anything that surprised you?
Good question. I think something that I've a paper that was just accepted last month that was very, very interesting, and something that for about 2, maybe 3 years, I was kind of on the trail of, but have yet to kind of understand quantitatively whether or not this hypothesis is true or not, is, can you be too gritty in sport? Is there a point where grit has maladaptive outcomes and perhaps there's a dark side? And intuitively that makes sense to us, whether you're an athlete or not. I think whether it's ourselves or whether it's someone that we've known that is so stubborn about achieving some goal that they almost have tunnel vision, and at the end of it all, they're not able to achieve that goal. So either, you know, on the lesser extent in terms of how bad the outcome is, they've wasted their time, or perhaps because they aren't able to achieve that goal, there's some sort of emotional spiral afterwards. In sport, I think that can go even further, because athletes are putting their bodies on the line every single day. They're putting their minds on the line every single day. So if they're to be really, really gritty about some sort of goal and not achieve it, there might be even more of an outcome of, say, injury. Again, long-term exit from the sport, not able to return. So what was surprising in that, I conducted a couple interviews last year. I recently did a review on all of the literature in the sport kind of bubble that looked at grit in sport. And after the review, I went to 6 varsity level coaches here at the University of Saskatchewan. And it's kind of a way to give important stakeholders a look into what your results were and have them either point out things that were really interesting, things that they disagree with, or holes, like stuff that they really want to know that doesn't exist yet. And I kept on getting this theme from coaches was, you know what, I don't think you can have too gritty of an athlete, or I've really only encountered one athlete that perhaps you would define as too gritty, but at the end of the day, it's really, really rare. So I thought that was really interesting how all of these coaches kind of came up against that big hypothesis that I had, was that you can be too gritty. We got to avoid giving athletes too much power. Uh, so I think that was really, really surprising, but I've yet to quantitatively test that.
Interesting. Is there anything that you found you didn't like? I find the most convincing research that I look through is when a researcher is looking for one thing and they find something else that is the opposite of what they hypothesized, and then they have to come to grips with it. It's like tearing down an axiom of what they believed and having to go back on it. So the best example I can think of is Darwin. A religious man goes across the world and finds a bunch of buried animals that shouldn't be in North America, or are no longer in North America, and then has to over time come to terms with this idea of evolution, that we weren't created in Genesis by an omniscient being. So he had to come to terms with that, which I find interesting. And I find that those ideas, that type of research, is the most convincing to me, because the person is actually working against what they come up against, and then the reality of what they realize is stronger than their preconceived biases.
Absolutely. I can't say that I've had such a big worldview shift as Darwin.
Really? Are you sure?
I'm sure that's coming. Like, give it 2 more years and we'll chat again. But I think the most interesting thing that we've already touched on is that grit might not actually be something that's worth studying, because there's already terms or concepts out there that are already looking at those outcomes, that those behaviors. So, for example, conscientiousness.
Right.
The biggest critique of grit is that, like I was saying, it's old wine in a new bottle. The old wine being the big five, like probably one of the most highly cited papers in the field of personality research, personality psychology, is that Big Five questionnaire in conscientiousness. And then grit is this really cool looking wine bottle with a screw top, so you know that it's like very, very modern. So what I kept finding again in that review that I did was, again, a lot of sport researchers that still have those questions, which to me is a little stressful because I'm kind of hanging my hat on this thing. But what I'm hoping to do in my next research study is plug in and ask a bunch of athletes, get them to complete questionnaires of these already existing terms, of these already existing concepts, and compare them against grit and see, okay, which one is the best? Which one has the most predictability, predicts the most variance in positive outcomes like well-being or performance? So those terms, those concepts being, of course, conscientiousness, hardiness, there's a separate kind of perseverance scale, and mental toughness.
Interesting. So when you started to be asked questions like that, why not conscientiousness? Why not just stick with conscientiousness? Why not do this? Why did you still hover towards grit? What's the magnet in grit that attracts you?
And I still get asked. I was at a conference last week and I got asked that question after I gave my presentation. So it's fairly constant, which is okay. And right now it's because there's no definitive proof just yet in the domain of sport. I think there's a little bit more evidence existing kind of in the general literature. A lot of grit research has been done with education, so whether that's younger kids or university populations, and how they approach their academic pursuits. I wonder if grit in sport perhaps acts a little bit differently than in other domains, because grit is so important. Again, sport is something that maybe you're doing 2 a day. So maybe you have 2 practices, maybe you have like a lift session in between, multiple instances in a day where you have to battle your mind, battle your brain, battle your body in order to persevere and hit that long-term goal. So I wonder if grit in sport just has a little bit more importance, a little bit more weight to it than perhaps in other domains. So that's
very interesting.
right now. Yeah.
Right. No, that's very interesting. I think that, because you're right, sport is a little bit of a different domain, and maybe conscientiousness could be a broader term, and grit could be something that could be more conducive to the description of individuals in sport.